now that he's in his second term.
Mm.
And, we'd like to keep things current here, so we're basing this deep dive on a really interesting article.
Okay.
It's called Trump and the Deep State, a second-term dilemma. It was written by an independent investigative journalist, a guy named Paul Smith, and it was published just last week on March 12th, 2025.
So this is all very recent then?
Super recent.
Yeah.
And probably going to be pretty impactful. I mean, Trump's approach to this whole deep state thing could have some big consequences, domestically and internationally, I'd say.
Yeah, for sure. The timing of this article is particularly interesting. Trump's coming in with, well, you could say a clear mandate. And how he deals with this deep state idea, well, it's going to be a huge factor moving forward.
Okay, so let's back up for a second. For those who might not be totally up to speed, can you explain what this deep state actually is?
Yeah.
And why it's making so many waves?
Sure. Essentially, the deep state is this idea that there's a sort of hidden network. It's made up of career bureaucrats, intelligence officials, those kinds of folks.
Okay.
And the idea is that they operate behind the scenes. They've got a lot of power, a lot of influence, and it doesn't really matter which political party is in charge. They stay put.
Okay.
And Trump, well, he definitely sees them as a threat. He's even called them disloyal.
Right. And the article points out that he's calling for some pretty big cuts to the federal government, specifically agencies he thinks are part of this deep state.
Yeah.
But doing that, especially now with everything going on globally, doesn't that seem a little risky?
Well, yeah, that's the whole dilemma that Smith, the author, lays out in the article. On the one hand, you have Trump. He wants to streamline the government, get rid of what he sees as this entrenched bureaucracy. But at the same time, we're living in a pretty wild world right now. Tensions are rising everywhere you look. We've got some complex problems on our hands. You need a strong intelligence community to deal with that. Experienced people.
That makes sense. So it's like a tug of war.
Pretty much.
There's this great quote in the article. It's Trump talking. He says, "How do you dismantle big pharma? By announcing there are only two genders."
Wow.
Yeah, it's definitely a head-scratcher.
Mm-hmm.
What do you make of that? And how does it fit into this bigger deep state conversation?
It's a very provocative statement, that's for sure. It kind of highlights Trump's unconventional style, right? He's not afraid to shake things up. Some people might look at that quote and say it's Trump dismissing the establishment, the norms, the institutions, which you can argue goes hand in hand with his distrust of this deep state he keeps talking about.
Right.
But then, of course, you've got critics who'd say this kind of approach, it can really undermine the expertise we need, especially if we want to tackle
CIA officials, they seem pretty worried about Trump's stance, don't they?
They do. They're very concerned about what might happen if Trump starts purging experienced intelligence professionals, especially with all the global unrest going on. They make the argument that these folks, they have critical expertise, they've got institutional knowledge that we need. It's vital for national security.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter what their political affiliations are.
It's like you have these really experienced intelligence people, and they're basically saying, don't dismantle the very systems they were a part of. That's a pretty stark contrast to Trump's position.
It is. It raises the question, can you actually streamline the government without losing all that experience, all that expertise built up within these agencies?
Well, it's causing quite a stir. What's the deal there? Fill me in.
Well, Gabbard, she's a former congresswoman, served in the military. She's got a history of, let's say, challenging the way things are usually done. And so her nomination, well, it's been getting some mixed reactions.
I bet.
Some people are happy about it. They like her unconventional thinking, her military experience. But then you've got others, like the Wall Street Journal, for example, who are worried. They bring up her past opposition to certain policies, and they're not so sure her views align with the kind of objective analysis you need in intelligence work.
So even among people who generally agree with Trump, there's some hesitation about Gabbard.
Definitely. It really points to how divided things are when it comes to, the role of intelligence in Trump's second term. And the whole question of expertise, too.
Absolutely. And it brings us right back to the core of this deep dive. The dilemma Smith lays out in his article. How do you balance the need for an efficient, smaller government with the need for a really strong, experienced intelligence community? Especially in a world that's facing so many complicated threats.
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question.
It really is. Okay, so we've set the stage. Now, let's zoom in a little closer. What are some of the specific global challenges that Trump is facing in his second term? And how does all this deep state stuff tie into those challenges?
All right, let's do it. Things are pretty complicated out there, and if we want to understand what's really at stake, well, we need to dig into the details.
All right, so let's talk about those global challenges. The article mentions increased cooperation between countries like China, Russia, North Korea, and Iran. That sounds, I don't know, kind of like a big deal.
It is a big deal. We're seeing these countries, they're coordinating their actions more and more in ways we haven't really seen before. And that shift in the global power dynamic, well, it's definitely a challenge for the U.S.
When you say challenge, what do you mean exactly? Like, what kind of challenges?
Well, think about it. On the economic side, you've got China. Their influence is growing all the time. And their Belt and Road Initiative, that's reshaping global trade.
And it seems like to even begin to deal with those kinds of challenges, you need a deep understanding of like who the players are, what they want, what they're capable of. That's where a strong intelligence community comes in, right?
Exactly. You need people who can analyze all that data, all that information that's out there, connect the dots, figure out what's actually happening, give accurate assessments. And then you need the operatives, the people on the ground, gathering intelligence from human sources, often in very dangerous places.
Right. But if Trump's pushing to cut the government down, get rid of people he sees as disloyal, doesn't that make it harder to have a strong intelligence community?
It could, yeah. You're talking about skills and relationships that take years to build, decades even. You can't just like snap your fingers and create that overnight.
So experience matters.
It matters a lot.
The article also talks about the conflicts in the Middle East, and Europe, and those just seem to be getting more and more complex.
Yeah.
How does that all play into this?
It's a great example of why you need experience, why you need expertise in the intelligence community. In those conflicts, you're dealing with a lot of different groups, alliances that are always changing, new information coming in all the time. For policymakers to make good decisions, they need intelligence that's accurate, they need it fast, and it needs to consider everything that's going on.
So basically, you can't oversimplify these conflicts.
Right. And that's kind of where the article hints that maybe Trump is, well, underestimating how complex these situations really are. He wants things to be quick, decisive, and I get that. But a lot of these conflicts, they require a nuanced approach. Diplomacy, you know, and you've got to have a deep understanding of the history, the culture, all of it. It's not just about military power. You need strategic thinking, and you need to be able to use all the tools you have, including intelligence.
So even if you like the idea of making the government smaller, there's a chance that doing it Trump's way could actually make us less safe, less able to deal with these global issues.
That's the dilemma, yeah. Efficiency versus expertise. Is it possible to have both?
Tough question. What does the article say about the potential consequences? Like, what are the risks if Trump actually does this?
One of the biggest worries is that if you make people in the intelligence community feel like they're not trusted, if they're afraid to speak up, you're going to lose people. The best people will leave, or they'll stay quiet when they should be speaking up. And that leads to bad information, bad decisions.
So it's like if you assume everyone's lying to you, eventually they might actually start to.
Yeah, like a self-fulfilling prophecy kind of thing.
Yeah.
And the article also suggests that if our intelligence agencies are weaker, our adversaries, the countries that want to do us harm, well, they might get bolder.
Because they see weakness.
Right. They'll think they can get away with more.
So this is pretty serious stuff. It's not just some political game. Trump's decisions about the deep state, they could have big effects here in the U.S. and for the whole world.
No doubt about it. And that's what makes this conversation so important. We can't just ignore this. We need to understand how complex it is, and we need to think about what might happen, the good and the bad.
Definitely. Now, the article brings up another big challenge, technology. It's changing so fast, and countries are competing like crazy. How does that fit into this whole deep state thing?
Oh, it's a huge part of it. AI, cyber warfare, space, it's all happening so fast. And if the U.S. wants to stay ahead, we need to have the best intelligence. That means having agencies that are well-funded and staffed with people who know what they're doing.
But some people would say that we need new ideas, fresh perspectives, that maybe some of these institutions, these agencies, are stuck in the past.
And they might be right to some extent, but how do you bring in new ideas without losing the experience and knowledge that's already there? That's the real question.
Sounds like walking a tightrope.
It is, and that's why this whole debate about the deep state is so fascinating. It really gets you thinking about, the role of government, who has the power, and how we need experts in a world that's changing all the time.
So we've talked about a lot. Trump's views on the deep state, the risks of getting rid of experts, and this whole global situation that seems to be changing every day. What do you think is the most important takeaway from all of this?
To me, it all comes down to this tension. You've got two goals, and they both seem important. You want to make the government more efficient, but you also need to keep the country safe in a world that's, well, pretty complicated.